If you've just started playing MFL or you're thinking of getting into it, there's loads of new information to get your head around, lots of different strategies and tactics. But here are the 7 biggest mistakes I see new players make. Now, I know why players make these mistakes, because it was only a few months ago I was a brand new player and I absolutely made a few of these mistakes. But between learning the market, understanding the league system, understanding how to manage your team and tactics, there's so many places where you can just put a foot wrong without really realizing. So let's get straight into number 1. This is by far the biggest mistake I think I see new players make, and it's buying a team that are too low for where they actually want to be. In MFL, there are 9 tiers of leagues going from Diamond all the way down to Spark. And the relative ability of teams in each of those leagues gets higher the further up the pyramid you go. And for most people, they just want to buy a new club, usually from MFL themselves, and start with a small budget to get to understand the game. And that's absolutely fine. The bottom of the leagues is exactly where you should be. However, a few people will come in with $500, $1,000 budgets and go into that bottom league. And for so many different reasons, it's a terrible thing to do. The reason is that you're getting a terrible MFL return for the amount of money you're putting into the game, and that's going to slow down your progression in future seasons. If you have the budget to compete in Stone or Iron, then buy a team in Stone or Iron. There's usually loads listed up on the marketplace in between seasons. It will allow you to buy at that level. You'll get a good MFL return, and your players will be playing against other players of around the same rating, which although makes it more difficult to win, it does mean that their progression will be far, far, far better. Now, I'm not trying to call anybody out here, and I'm sure there's a really legitimate reason why he's done this, but this user, Peyton, has a team in Spark that genuinely could get promoted out of Iron, potentially even Bronze. It's so, so good. And when you look at the league projections made by MFL Manager, the difference in his team rating to the teams he's going to be playing means his players are going to get about half of the experience that they would otherwise get if they were playing against even just slightly better teams. But also the maximum he can win at the end of the season is just 2,400 MFL. If he just loaned out his top 4 players, he'd make triple that easy. But mistake number 2 kind of allows you to do this, right? If you do want to start the game and get the first team and start at that lowest rung because you like the idea of being the only owner of a club. I get it, it's a game where you have these weird emotional attachments. Then the biggest mistake I see people make at that point, like this team, is overbuying for where you are. Whilst you may have a big budget, actually buying those players that would allow you to compete in 3-4 leagues up from where you are now is one of the worst things you can do if you're going to use them in that league. Because really, it's just unnecessary. Now, Spark's a bit of a special case because so many new teams are in there. You have a lot of people who have made the mistake of overbuying their team for this level. But even still, you could easily get promoted from Spark with a 65, 66 average team and have saved so much money on players and put that money towards buying good young prospects potentially that you're going to loan out to teams to gain that MFL so that when you do get promoted and then you get into the Ice League, you now have a bank of new players or some money from the MFL that you've earned that you can now invest into the new team. So there's nothing wrong with buying a team capable of winning a league. It's just you don't want it to be 5, 6, 7 average ratings too high because you're destroying players' progression. It will also give you a kind of false sense of security in how good you are tactically because you're going to be playing against people who, even if they had the perfect tactics to beat you, just aren't going to because their players aren't good enough. And so when you do reach that level where you're playing against more even sides, suddenly that tactic that's worked for 2, 3, 4 seasons completely stops working. Unless you do a Wrexham and just keep buying players, maybe like old players that used to play in the upper divisions that people don't want anymore and keep trying to have that advantage over everybody else. But mistake number 3 also involves team composition, and this is more about how you level your team out. Really, the ideal squad in MFL has most of the players around exactly the same rating. You don't really want a difference of more than 3 or 4 between your top rated player and everybody else. And the reason is that in training, if there's a massive difference between your best player and the bulk of your squad, they will lose a massive amount of experience in training, which will delay their progression until later on in their careers. If you have a player that's much better than the rest of your squad, you're far better loaning them out, gaining the MFL from that loan, which will probably more than you can earn in the league you're in anyway, and then using that player once you've been promoted to about where their level is. So for example, here with Bishop FC, he has Dasuta and Eichhorn both at the very top of his rating charts that are playing in his Spark team this year, but the average rating is taken from your top 16 players, and then the training punishments for being above that average rating are taken from there. And so with an average opponent squad rating of around 55, and the top 16 in this club averaging 62, as you can see from this chart in the white paper, those top 2 players are going to be getting about 25% of the potential XP they could have over the course of the season. And maybe that's been taken into account because they're 30 and 28. So maybe it's, I don't care about the progression. I just want to have these players that are going to get me into the next league. And that's a sound strategy, but it's just always something to be careful of. I would really try and not have a large spread of ratings because you're going to really punish those players at the top of your agency that are training with players that aren't good enough. Switching gear a little for mistake number 4, we're going to go into tactics. And this is a mistake I made massively in my first season and half of my second season. I had individual instructions on nearly every single player in my team. And I don't know if it's that the engine isn't quite ready for that level of instructions, or actually if it's reflective of real life and you're kind of confusing the players in what you want them to do. But if you have multiple individual instructions on every player in your squad, your team will perform horribly. It's far better to target very specific things that you want your players to do and maybe have 6 individual tactics spread across your entire team. And I would concentrate these tactics mainly in terms of freedom because you can't change that in the team instructions. And then potentially if you've got a player who's got one outstanding stat, you can then tell them to either take more risky passes, maybe be more direct so that they're taking longer, riskier passes, dribble more often, or even shoot less often if they're not very good at shooting. But whilst it's tempting to go through every player and try and make them do the thing they're good at more and make them not do the thing they're bad at less, it doesn't really work out like that in game, and you're far better off letting the game kind of work that out itself, making your players do something more aligned with a team tactic and building your team around the team instructions rather than individual ones. I think it gives more consistent results. Now, obviously, with the engine ever changing, this may change in the future. And hey, if you're getting good results with loads of individual instructions, then don't listen to me. This is just from my personal experience. When I've spoken to the best players in the game, that's what they tend to tell me as well. Don't do too many individual instructions. It's kind of perceived knowledge rather than we absolutely know this, but it could change. One thing that's not going to change though is mistake number 5, and that is not rotating your squad properly. So there's a few different reasons why you might rotate your squad. The first is just for fitness sake. In my What is MFL video, which I'll link up here somewhere, I talked about how as a player's energy depletes, their rating on the pitch also depletes. And that's dictated by essentially their form color. If it's bright green, they are going to play to their stats. If it's muddy green, it's kind of 1 less. If it's yellow, it's 5 less. Orange is 10 less. And then red is 20 less than their stats. So you really don't want to let players run down on their energy. And so you're going to need to keep that rotation in. You're going to want a bit of forward planning as well. Because if you've got a crunch match, whether that's at the bottom of the league or at the top of the league, you're going to want to make sure that your best players are fit for that match. And so maybe rotating one of your best players out, even though they are still on bright green, against a weaker side, can be a really good tactic to just make sure they're fresh coming into that final game against a big team or against a relegation candidate. But it's also worth remembering that even if they are on muddy green, they're only getting a -1 to their stats. So if their replacement is way worse and you really need to win that game, then it's sometimes worth keeping them in. And I did it quite a lot last year where I would get a player down to muddy green and just keep them in for one more game because I needed to win it and then rotate them out the next game. But one of the other reasons you might want to rotate a player out or at least change an individual instruction is if they're about to be suspended for yellow cards. You'll see how many yellow cards your player has, and if they're on 4 out of 5, then the next one is going to cause a suspension. And if that means they're suspended for a game that you really need to win, then it might be worth resting them then, or at least telling them don't dive into tackles. And the final bit on rotating is that whilst it's tempting to keep players in so that they gain match experience throughout the course of the season, actually the amount of experience you gain decreases with every game you play, to the point where once you've played about 80% of your team's matches, it's really negligible the amount of experience you'll get because that's about where 100% XP for the season will be. Now, you can go over 100%, but you really do want to make sure that if you've got young players or if you've got a player that you care about the progression, that you make sure they get enough games to get enough XP during the season. I've got the graph up here of like how many games relates to how much percentage of the match XP they can get. So you just want to make sure that you're at least rotating 1 or 2 players pretty much every game. Mistake number 6 comes around loans, and maybe this is a video in and of itself, but pricing your loan and then determining what a price of a loan is for you when you're bringing a player in is actually a little bit more complicated than just reviewing the numbers. Especially when you're looking at loaning a player out, you want to think about, well, what's the average amount of MFL I think I'm going to get from loaning this player out? Is the team I'm loaning them to going to finish at the top of the league, in the middle of the league? Or do they look like a relegation candidate, in which case maybe I want to bump that percentage? And then you've got to work out, well, how much more MFL would I earn if they played for me? If you're in the lower leagues, usually it's much better to loan out a higher rated player, because even if you get like 5% loan in Iron, that's going to be about as much MFL as you would get if you finished towards the top in Spark. And so if it's not the difference between you winning Spark and coming bottom of Spark, it's probably not worthwhile keeping that player, and you'll get more from loaning them out. But conversely, when you're bringing a player in, you want to be careful not to give too much of your winnings away. You need to calculate the cost of loaning in a player versus just buying one yourself and maybe selling them at the end of the season for a slightly reduced price. So if you're going to give away, say, 1,200 MFL, that's 2 common packs. That's about $7. And so if you can buy a player, use them, and sell them for less than a $7 loss, it's probably better off doing that than loaning them in. You might even get some growth on the player that you buy and be able to sell them for a bit of a profit. Or even in the mid-season break when people are kind of desperate for those free agents, release them and then sell them for like a big profit even though they've not progressed at all. And so whenever you're loaning, whether that's in or out, it's always worth just calculating a kind of presumed cost of either of those transactions and whether you're better off holding a player, loaning a player out, loaning a player in, or just buying a new player. And that brings me on to my final mistake that I see new people make, and this was one I made big style. This is where you're really excited about buying players for the first time, especially in that off-season, your first kind of seasonal break. You've maybe been promoted or you've stayed in a league and it's like, right, now I need to build a true team of my own. I was relying on loans last year. I'm ready to put some money in. And you're on the market and you see a great deal pop up and you're like, do you know what? I'm just going to buy that straight away. And then you go and check them and realize they've already got a contract for this current season. And so that great player you've got, you now can't really do anything with. This used to be a much bigger problem. When I first started, 3-season contracts were a thing. And I bought a player, Decker, who is a brilliant centre-back. But when I bought him, he had 2 years remaining on his contract. So it was 2 seasons that I just wasn't going to be able to use this player. Now, you can request contract cancellation. So I contacted the player who had him on loan and asked him, would he be willing to cancel the contract? Could we work something out? I didn't mind spending a little bit of money or loaning him somebody else for the season just to replace that void. He said he was going to use him for that season, but he'll give him back to me at the end of the season. Well, he sold the club, and so the new player doesn't have any contact details, and I still can't use Decker, so I'm only going to be getting him at the end of next season. It will have been over 2 seasons since I bought him, but at least he's progressing, and hopefully he can do well at FC Osaka. Now, the flip side of this is a little bit less fun to talk about. It's something I saw happen in the community recently. If you're a relatively new player to the game, and you've got a player that's contracted to your club, and they get bought by anybody, you are under no obligation to cancel the contract. It is not the done thing in the MFL community to cancel contracts. And one of the bigger users on the game actually messaged somebody and said it's the dumb thing, you don't want to get a bad name in the community. It kind of felt a little bit like bullying. This is just not true. If they've not contacted you before they've bought the player to check if you'll cancel the contract, you are just under no obligation to do it. That is their mistake and their problem. So don't let anybody tell you you should cancel it. Now, the flip side of that is if you do agree and you say you're going to cancel the contract and they buy the player, honor it, because there's not anything that anyone can really do to force you to do it, but we want to build a nice community, and like 99.9% of this community are amazing. I've loved being part of the MFL communities and getting to know different people. You just don't want to be in that 0.1%. So whenever you're on the market and looking to buy a player, tick free agent on the contract drop down, or just keep an eye out. Whenever you click on a player to check their stats, if they're contracted, under their name will be a club before you get to their ID. If they're a free agent, it won't have a club there. And if there's a player who you really like the look of and you would wonder if someone will cancel their contract, the first thing to check is, is the owner of the player and the owner of the club that they're contracted to the same? If they are, then you're probably in a better spot to ask them to cancel a contract. In order to find out how to contact somebody, the best thing to do is to go to their profile. If you go to info down at the bottom, most people will have linked their Discord. And so you can just take that Discord name and message them on there. If they haven't linked it, they may still have joined the MFL Discord, so you can maybe try and search their username just to see if they've popped up. But as I say, there are some users, like the guy who's got my Decker, who just don't seem to have any kind of footprint on the Discord or anything, so sometimes you've just got to let it slide, and I'll see how Mitchell's doing at the end of Season 5, I suppose. So if you're new to MFL or you've been thinking about getting involved, let me know if these tips were helpful. Let me know if you've made these mistakes, and if you have made mistakes as a new player that I haven't mentioned, put them in the comments so that we can talk about them maybe in a future video. Thanks very much for watching this one. I've been JoshXLS. I'll catch you in the next one.